Mom and Dad, over here." The teacher's cheerful voice echoed across the brightly decorated elementary school gymnasium, and in that single impossible moment, time seemed to pause. Every conversation faded. Every smiling parent turned to look. Charlotte Bennett, the 35-year-old CEO whose face had appeared on the cover of business magazines more times than she could count, stopped in her tracks beside a tall black father holding the tiny hand of a little girl with bright, curious eyes. Malik Carter blinked once, then twice, certain the teacher would immediately realize the mistake. She never did. Charlotte could have corrected everyone with a polite smile and a simple sentence. Instead, she glanced down at the little girl squeezing both their hands, noticed the excitement glowing across the child's face, and quietly chose to say nothing. For 3 long seconds, the entire room accepted a story that had never happened. Malik's heart pounded harder than it ever had during the long days spent lifting lumber, measuring oak boards, and building custom furniture in his modest woodworking shop on the edge of Charlotte. He was used to blending into the background, arriving early, leaving quietly, and making sure his 6-year-old daughter always felt loved even if life had never been easy. Since losing his wife 4 years earlier, every morning began before sunrise. Breakfast, school lunches, braiding Mia's curls after watching countless online tutorials because he refused to let anyone tell his daughter she looked anything less than beautiful. His hands were rough from years of honest work, but every splinter and callus reminded him he had built a life for his little girl without asking anyone for rescue. Charlotte's mornings could not have been more different. Her days started 40 floors above the city in a glass penthouse overlooking miles of skyline. Her assistant scheduled every minute. Investors expected perfection. Employees admired her confidence. Reporters called her the woman who never slowed down. Yet beneath every tailored blazer and every polished interview was a silence no award had ever filled. Success echoed loudly inside boardrooms, but it disappeared the moment she unlocked the door to an empty home where no one waited to ask how her day had gone. Today she had only agreed to attend the school fundraiser because Bennett Living Group had donated new science labs and reading programs across the district. She expected speeches, handshakes, photographs, and another afternoon that would blur into every other public appearance. She never expected to meet Malik Carter. Nia looked up at Charlotte with complete trust. "Can you stand next to Daddy?" she asked softly. "Our class picture looks better when families stay together." Charlotte felt something shift deep inside her chest. It was small, almost impossible to notice, like the first warm ray of sunlight slipping through heavy clouds after days of rain. She nodded before logic could interrupt kindness. Cameras flashed. Parents smiled. Someone whispered that they made a beautiful family. Malik lowered his eyes, unsure whether embarrassment or gratitude had taken hold first. Charlotte heard every whisper, yet she still refused to correct anyone. Neither of them realized that before the afternoon ended, a single photograph taken inside that school gym would escape beyond those walls, spread across the internet, and quietly begin changing both of their lives forever. The applause slowly faded as families drifted toward the outdoor courtyard where colorful tents, food trucks, and student art displays filled the warm North Carolina afternoon with cheerful energy. Fresh popcorn scented the air. Children raced across the grass, carrying paper pinwheels while volunteers arranged folding tables beneath rows of white canopies. Charlotte Bennett stepped away from the crowd for what she hoped would be a quiet moment. But every few feet someone stopped to thank her for the generous donation that had funded the school's new technology center. She smiled graciously, answered every question with practiced confidence, and never once revealed how exhausted she felt beneath the polished composure everyone admired. Across the courtyard, Malik Carter knelt beside Nia, carefully tying the loose lace on her favorite blue sneaker before brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Ready for the science booth?" he asked with a warm smile. Nia nodded enthusiastically and slipped her tiny hand into his. Watching them from a distance, Charlotte noticed something she had not seen in years. There was no rush in Malik's movements, no distraction from a buzzing phone, no assistant whispering about schedules or meetings. Every ounce of his attention belonged to his daughter. It was such an ordinary moment that it felt extraordinary. Her own childhood surfaced unexpectedly. She remembered her father missing birthdays because another business deal could not wait. She remembered learning that achievement was celebrated while quiet moments around the dinner table were treated as luxuries. Somewhere along the way, she had accepted that success always demanded loneliness. Yet standing there beneath the late afternoon sunlight, she wondered if she had accepted the wrong bargain. "Miss Bennet," Nia called excitedly from across the lawn. "Come see what we built." Charlotte hesitated for only a heartbeat before walking over. Together they admired a small bridge made from wooden craft sticks. "Daddy says every strong bridge starts with a solid foundation," Nia explained proudly. Charlotte glanced toward Malik. He gave an almost apologetic smile. "Occupational hazard," he said. "Everything turns into a woodworking lesson eventually." Charlotte laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even her. It sounded unfamiliar, lighter than the carefully measured laughter expected during executive dinners and shareholder receptions. For several minutes, they talked about school projects, favorite books, and the importance of building things that lasted. There was no discussion of billion-dollar acquisitions or quarterly earnings. Malik never asked about her company, her wealth, or the luxury car waiting outside the school gates. Instead, he asked whether the reading program would include books for children with learning differences because Nia's best friend struggled with reading. The question caught Charlotte completely off guard. Most people wanted something from her. Investment advice, donations, business connections. Malik only cared whether every child would have the same opportunity. That simple conversation lingered in her thoughts long after it ended. Nearby, another parent quietly snapped a photograph as Charlotte leaned down to congratulate Nia on her project while Malik stood proudly beside them. The picture looked effortless, almost natural, as though they had shared moments like this for years instead of minutes. Before the afternoon was over, that single image would travel far beyond the school grounds, carrying with it a story that thousands of strangers would believe without hesitation. While the three people inside the photograph had no idea how quickly one innocent misunderstanding was beginning to reshape all of their futures. By the time Charlotte's driver pulled away from the school, the golden afternoon had softened into the warm glow of early evening, and the city skyline reflected across the glass windows of her SUV like two different worlds quietly overlapping. Her phone buzzed every few seconds with calendar reminders, messages from board members, and requests that demanded immediate decisions. But for the first time in months, she ignored them all. Instead, her thoughts kept returning to the little wooden bridge Nia had proudly held up with both hands, and to the quiet confidence in Malik Carter's voice when he spoke about building strong foundations. There had been no performance, no attempt to impress her, and somehow that honesty stayed with her longer than the praise she heard every day from executives and investors. 20 minutes later, inside Bennett Living Group headquarters, the polished marble lobby echoed with hurried footsteps as employees prepared for Monday's quarterly strategy meeting. Charlotte walked through the revolving doors with her usual composed expression, yet something felt different. Even the familiar scent of fresh coffee and polished walnut seemed strangely distant. "Good evening, Miss Bennet," the receptionist greeted warmly. Charlotte smiled back before stepping into the private elevator. As the doors closed, her executive assistant, Lauren Pierce, looked up from a digital tablet. "Tomorrow is fully booked," Lauren said. "Board meeting at 8, investor presentation at 10, interview with Business Weekly at 1, and dinner with the Regional Development Committee at 7. Charlotte nodded automatically, but her attention shifted when another notification appeared on her phone. Someone had tagged Bennett Living Group in a social media post from the school fundraiser. She tapped the screen almost absent-mindedly. There it was, the photograph. Nia stood between them with a joyful grin, holding both of their hands while sunlight spilled across the grass behind them. Malik looked surprised but relaxed, and Charlotte herself was smiling in a way she barely recognized. The caption beneath the picture read, "The sweetest family at today's school fundraiser." Within minutes, hundreds of comments had appeared. Most were kind. Some joked that the famous CEO had finally found someone who looked genuinely happy beside her. Others admired how naturally they seemed to fit together. Charlotte stared at the screen longer than she intended. She knew every comment was built on a misunderstanding, yet none of them mocked Malik. Instead, people praised the warmth they saw in the image. Lauren noticed the silence. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. Charlotte locked the phone and slipped it into her pocket. "Just a school photo," she answered, though even she realized how unusual it was that she had not immediately corrected the story online. Across town, Malik closed the small woodworking shop just before sunset. The smell of freshly cut maple still lingered in the air as he swept sawdust from the floor. Nia sat on a workbench coloring pictures while soft country music played from an old radio near the window. "Daddy," she asked without looking up, "do you think Miss Bennett liked spending time with us?" Malik smiled to himself while placing his tools back onto the neatly organized wall. "I think she was very kind," he replied. Nia nodded thoughtfully before returning to her drawing. She carefully colored 3 smiling figures standing beneath a bright blue sky. One looked like her. One looked like her father. The third wore a yellow dress with long brown hair. She quietly folded the picture and slipped it into her backpack, never imagining that before another sunrise, the same photograph filling Charlotte with quiet questions would become the center of a story that neither of them could control. The next morning arrived with clear blue skies, but the calm outside was nothing like the storm quietly unfolding online. By 7 o'clock, the photograph had been shared thousands of times. Local news blogs reposted it. Lifestyle pages praised the image of a successful business leader standing beside what they called a devoted father. Complete strangers invented stories about how they had met, how long they had been together, even how inspiring their relationship seemed. Charlotte sat alone at the head of the executive conference table as sunlight poured through 40-foot windows overlooking downtown Charlotte. The polished walnut surface reflected stacks of financial reports waiting for her attention, yet the only image occupying her thoughts was a little girl smiling between 2 adults who had met less than 24 hours earlier. "Good morning, everyone," one of the directors began as the board meeting came to order. Charts appeared across the large presentation screen. Revenue projections, expansion plans, market forecasts. Charlotte listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and guided every discussion with the same confidence that had earned her reputation. Still, every time her phone vibrated with another notification, she resisted the temptation to look. Finally, during a short break, Lauren quietly approached her chair. "The communications department would like to know if they should release a statement about the photo," she said gently. Charlotte looked toward the city beyond the glass walls. Cars moved through the morning traffic like streams of silver beneath the sunlight. She remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Not yet." Lauren blinked. "You are comfortable letting people keep believing it." Charlotte folded her hands calmly. No one is being hurt by a photograph of 2 people standing beside a happy child. It was the first time in years she had chosen patience over immediate damage control, and even she could not fully explain why. Across town, Malik unlocked the front door of Carter Custom Woodworks just as the first rays of morning illuminated the handmade rocking chairs displayed in the front window. Before he could switch on the lights, his oldest customer, Mr. Harold Jenkins, walked inside carrying a paper bag filled with fresh biscuits from the neighborhood diner. "Morning, son," the older man said with a wide grin. "Looks like you are famous now." Malik frowned. "Excuse me." Mr. Jenkins pulled out his phone and showed him the same photograph. Malik sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "It is all a misunderstanding." "Maybe," the older man replied with a knowing smile. "But I have never seen you smile that much around anyone except Nia." Malik laughed softly but quickly shook his head. "She is a remarkable woman, but we live in completely different worlds." Mr. Jenkins looked around the workshop, where shelves held carefully crafted tables, bookshelves, and toy chests built by hand over many years. "Different worlds are built from the same wood," he said quietly. "It is what people choose to build that matters." Those words lingered in the quiet shop long after the old man left. Later that afternoon, Charlotte unexpectedly arrived at the elementary school again to review the progress of the new science lab her foundation had funded. As she stepped into the hallway, she heard a familiar laugh echoing from one of the classrooms. Through the partially open door, she saw Malik helping a group of children assemble small wooden birdhouses while Nia proudly explained each step beside him. None of the children cared who owned a corporation or who worked with rough hands every day. They only saw 2 adults who listened, encouraged, and smiled. Charlotte remained in the hallway without interrupting, realizing that for the second day in a row, the place where she felt most at peace was nowhere near her office. The following morning, the atmosphere inside Bennett Living Group no longer felt calm. Conversations stopped whenever Charlotte entered a room. Employees who usually discussed contracts and construction schedules now glanced at their phones before quickly looking away. The headlines had changed overnight. What had begun as a heartwarming school photograph had become a business story. One financial blog questioned whether the company's image might be affected by the growing public fascination with Charlotte's private life. Another article speculated endlessly about the mysterious black father standing beside her. None of the reporters knew Malik Carter. None of them mentioned his years of honest work, the custom furniture he built by hand, or the countless evenings he spent helping neighborhood children repair broken bicycles after school. They reduced him to a stranger in a photograph. Charlotte quietly read every headline without showing emotion. During the executive meeting that afternoon, one of the senior board members carefully folded his reading glasses before speaking. "Charlotte, this conversation is uncomfortable, but necessary. Investors are asking questions. They expect clarity." Another director nodded. "The longer the silence continues, the more assumptions people will make." Charlotte remained perfectly still. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the polished conference table while the city shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. She answered with the same calm voice she used during billion-dollar negotiations. "There is nothing inappropriate about attending a school event." The room fell silent. "That may be true," another board member replied carefully, "but perception drives markets." Charlotte looked toward the skyline for a long moment before responding. Perhaps perception should spend more time learning the truth. No one challenged her, yet no one looked reassured either. Meanwhile, across town, Malik noticed the change in a very different way. Customers who normally came to order handcrafted dining tables now recognized him before he could introduce himself. Some smiled warmly. Others asked questions he had no interest in answering. A young delivery driver even joked that he had become the most famous carpenter in North Carolina. Malik smiled politely, but inside he felt increasingly uneasy. Fame had never been part of the life he wanted for himself or for Nia. That evening, after closing the workshop, he picked Nia up from her after-school art club. She climbed into his pickup truck holding another colorful drawing. "Miss Bennett came back today," she said excitedly while fastening her seatbelt. "She watched us build birdhouses." Malik glanced toward her with gentle curiosity. "Did you thank her?" Nia nodded enthusiastically. "She said my birdhouse looked strong because Daddy taught me patience." Malik smiled, but the warmth quickly faded as his phone buzzed again. Another message. Another article. Another photograph. He turned the screen off without opening it. As they drove home beneath the orange glow of the setting sun, rows of quiet suburban houses passed slowly outside the windows. Nia eventually fell asleep against the passenger seat, clutching her drawing tightly against her chest. Malik glanced at the picture while stopping at a red light. 3 smiling figures stood beneath a large oak tree. Above them, written in careful crayon letters, were the words, "The happiest day." His heart tightened. He understood something that the internet never could. This was no longer only about gossip or mistaken assumptions. Every new headline made it harder to protect the simple, peaceful life he had promised his daughter. Before sunrise the next morning, after hours of silent reflection, Malik made a decision that no one expected. Without telling Charlotte, he began preparing to quietly step out of the story before it could grow any larger. Believing that walking away was the only way to keep her career and Nia's happiness from becoming casualties of a misunderstanding that neither of them had ever intended. The sunrise arrived quietly, painting soft shades of gold across the rooftops of Charlotte, but neither Charlotte Bennett nor Malik Carter noticed the beauty waiting outside their windows. They were both awake long before dawn, separated by miles, yet carrying the same unspoken weight. In her penthouse, Charlotte stood barefoot beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a warm cup of untouched coffee resting in her hands. Below, the city slowly came alive. Traffic lights changed from red to green. Early commuters filled the streets. Somewhere in the distance, construction. Cranes stretched toward the brightening sky, building tomorrow one steel beam at a time. Normally, those sights reminded her why she had sacrificed so much to reach the life she now lived. This morning, they only reminded her how empty success could feel when there was no one waiting to share it. On the marble kitchen island lay a single sheet of paper. It was the drawing Nia had proudly handed her before leaving school the previous afternoon. 3 smiling figures stood beneath a wide oak tree, holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Across the top, written in uneven crayon letters, were the words, "Families make every place feel like home." Charlotte traced the colorful lines with her fingertips. She had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without hesitation, yet she found herself unable to explain why one child's drawing had become the most valuable thing inside her home. Across town, Malik quietly packed his workshop before opening hours. The familiar scent of cedar and maple surrounded him as morning light filtered through the dusty windows. Every tool rested exactly where it belonged. Every unfinished project waited patiently on the workbench. Routine had always given him peace, but today even the comforting rhythm of honest work could not quiet his thoughts. He opened the small office drawer beside the register and removed an envelope addressed to the elementary school. Inside was a polite letter explaining that Nia would transfer to another school district after the end of the month. He had not told her yet. He folded the envelope carefully and slipped it back inside the drawer. His plan was simple. Finish the remaining furniture orders. Move to a smaller town where no one recognized their faces. Let the headlines disappear. Let Charlotte's life return to normal. It felt like the responsible choice, even if it quietly broke his heart. Late that afternoon, Charlotte found herself driving without asking her chauffeur for a destination. "Take me to Carter Custom Woodworks," she said almost instinctively. The driver nodded and turned toward the quiet neighborhood where the workshop stood. When they arrived, Charlotte remained inside the vehicle for several moments, watching through the windshield as Malik patiently showed a young boy how to sand the edge of a small wooden birdhouse. There were no cameras, no reporters, no executives, only sunlight drifting through the open workshop door and the calm voice of a father teaching patience, one careful motion at a time. Charlotte noticed the way Malik encouraged the child instead of correcting every mistake. She noticed how easily people trusted him. Most of all, she noticed the peace that surrounded him, a peace money had never managed to purchase for her. She almost stepped out of the vehicle, but before she reached the door handle, she saw Malik lock the workshop early, place the envelope inside his truck, and drive away with an expression she had never seen before. It was not anger. It was quiet determination. Something told Charlotte that he had made a decision, and for reasons she could not explain, she suddenly feared that if she waited even one more day, she might lose the chance to discover what that decision truly was. Charlotte barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Malik locking the workshop earlier than usual, the quiet determination on his face refusing to leave her thoughts. By sunrise, she had already canceled her breakfast meeting with a group of international investors, something her assistant had never seen her do before. Instead of reviewing financial reports, Charlotte found herself staring once again at Nia's colorful drawing resting on her desk. 3 smiling figures beneath a wide oak tree. Families make every place feel like home. Those simple words suddenly felt more valuable than every framed award hanging on the walls behind her. At 8 o'clock, Lauren entered her office carrying a folder of media updates. "The story is finally slowing down," she said with relief. "Public attention is moving on." Charlotte nodded quietly, but something about those words unsettled her instead of comforting her. If the attention disappeared now, would Malik disappear with it? Before she could answer her own question, her phone rang. The caller identification displayed the name of the elementary school principal. Charlotte answered immediately. "Good morning, Miss Bennett. I wanted to thank you again for everything your foundation has done for our students." Charlotte smiled politely. "The pleasure is mine." The principal hesitated before continuing. "I also thought you should know that Mr. Carter stopped by this morning to request transfer paperwork for Nia." Charlotte sat upright, so quickly that her chair rolled backward across the hardwood floor. "Transfer paperwork?" she repeated softly. "Yes." He did not explain much, only that they would probably be leaving the district before next semester. After the call ended, silence filled the office. Charlotte looked out across the city, but the skyline had become a blur. She finally understood the expression she had seen on Malik's face outside the workshop. He had not been planning a vacation. He had been planning a goodbye. Meanwhile, Malik drove toward a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city where a modest 2-bedroom house had recently gone on the market. It was smaller than their current home, but it sat on a peaceful street surrounded by tall maple trees and an elementary school only a few blocks away. Nia skipped happily beside him, completely unaware of the reason for the visit. "Daddy," she asked while watching squirrels race across the front yard, "will there still be room for my art table?" Malik smiled gently. "Always." She nodded with complete trust, accepting his answer without another question. Inside the empty house, sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the wooden floors with soft golden light. It should have felt like a fresh beginning. Instead, every room reminded Malik of something they would leave behind. Nia's classroom, her friends, the little science lab where she had proudly shown Charlotte her bridge. He quietly reminded himself that protecting his daughter's peaceful childhood mattered more than his own feelings. Just as the real estate agent finished unlocking the back door, a familiar black SUV slowly turned onto the street. Charlotte stepped out before the driver had completely stopped the vehicle. She was still wearing the same navy business suit she had put on for a board meeting she never attended. Their eyes met across the quiet front yard. Neither of them spoke at first. The breeze gently stirred the maple leaves overhead, while Nia looked from one adult to the other with growing confusion. Charlotte finally broke the silence with a voice that was calm but filled with unmistakable emotion. "Please tell me you are not leaving because of me." Malik lowered his eyes for a long moment before answering. And in that quiet pause, Charlotte realized the truth she had been searching for had been standing in front of her all along. Malik let out a slow breath before lifting his eyes to meet Charlotte's. "Yes," he answered quietly, "but not because I was ashamed of standing beside you." The afternoon breeze drifted through the maple trees, carrying the scent of fresh grass and distant rain as silence settled gently between them. Nia wandered toward the front porch, fascinated by a row of colorful flowers growing beside the walkway, leaving the two adults alone for the first time since they had met. Charlotte searched Malik's face, trying to understand everything he had never said. "Then why?" she asked softly. Malik slipped both hands into the pockets of his work jacket. "Because every headline talks about me like I am a problem your company has to solve. Every article acts as though my life only matters because I accidentally appeared beside a successful woman." He paused, looking toward the quiet street before continuing. "I have spent years teaching my daughter that her worth is never measured by someone else's opinion. If I stay while the world keeps turning us into a story, eventually she will believe our peace depends on strangers." Charlotte lowered her gaze. His words carried no bitterness, only honesty. That made them impossible to ignore. "You should know something," she said after a long silence. "My board wanted me to release a statement days ago." Malik nodded. "I figured they would." "I refused." He looked at her with quiet surprise. Charlotte smiled faintly, though emotion softened her usually confident expression. "Not because I wanted people to believe something that was not true. I refused because every version they wrote sounded like an apology for standing beside you, and I could not sign my name to that." Malik remained completely still. The wind rustled the leaves overhead, while afternoon sunlight danced across the front lawn. Charlotte stepped one pace closer. "Do you know what I saw the first day we met?" she asked. "I saw a father who never stopped paying attention to his little girl. I saw someone who built furniture with his hands and confidence with his actions. I saw someone who never once treated me differently because of my position." She smiled gently. "That is not someone I need to explain away." Malik looked down for a moment before quietly laughing to himself. "You know," he said, "everyone thinks people like me dream about meeting someone with your life." Charlotte tilted her head with quiet curiosity. "And do they?" Malik shook his head. "No. I dreamed about giving my daughter stability. That was enough." Those simple words settled deeply inside Charlotte's heart. For the first time in years, she understood what genuine success looked like, and it had nothing to do with skyscrapers, stock prices, or magazine covers. At that moment, Nia came running back across the yard holding a tiny yellow flower she had found beside the porch. She smiled brightly and offered it to Charlotte with complete innocence. "This one is for you," she said. Charlotte accepted the flower as though it were the most precious gift she had ever received. Her eyes glistened softly in the afternoon light. Then she looked back at Malik with quiet certainty. "You wanted to leave because you thought protecting my career mattered more than your own happiness," she whispered. Malik did not deny it. Charlotte slowly shook her head. "Then you never really understood me." Before either of them could say another word, Lauren's name flashed across Charlotte's phone. The emergency board meeting had already begun without its chief executive, and every director in the company was waiting for a decision that would change far more than the future of Bennett Living Group. Charlotte looked at the glowing screen for only a second before pressing the side button and silencing the call. The ringing stopped, and with it came a stillness that felt more powerful than any boardroom she had ever commanded. She slipped the phone into her pocket and lifted her eyes back to Malik. "For years," she said softly, "I believed every difficult choice had only one correct answer. Today I finally understand that protecting a company means very little if I lose the courage to protect what is right." Malik studied her quietly, searching for hesitation that never appeared. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the maple leaves above them, scattering warm patterns across the front porch where Nia now sat humming to herself while arranging tiny yellow flowers into a neat circle. Charlotte smiled at the little girl before turning back to her father. "You wanted to leave because you thought my reputation mattered more than your presence in this city. But the people who truly know me are not asking whether I stood beside you. They are waiting to see whether I stand by my values." At that moment, Lauren called again. This time Charlotte answered. "The board is ready," Lauren said anxiously. "Everyone is waiting for your statement." Charlotte glanced once more at Malik, then calmly replied, "Tell them I will be there in 20 minutes. She ended the call and drove straight to Bennett Living Group headquarters. The executive boardroom fell completely silent when Charlotte entered. Directors, investors, and senior executives looked toward her with anxious expressions, expecting a carefully crafted public relations strategy. Instead, Charlotte walked to the front of the room without opening the prepared statement waiting on the podium. She folded the papers, placed them aside, and spoke from the heart. "Over the past week, many people have asked whether I intend to correct a misunderstanding. Today I want to correct a different one. Character is not measured by job titles, income, neighborhoods, or the color of someone's skin. I met a father who wakes up every day determined to build a better future for his daughter with honesty, patience, and dignity. If anyone believes standing beside a man like that damages the reputation of this company, then they have misunderstood the values upon which this company was built." The room remained silent. No one interrupted. No one argued. Even those who had questioned her earlier slowly lowered their eyes. Later that evening, Charlotte returned to the quiet neighborhood where Malik and Nia were packing the last few boxes they had gathered before deciding whether to move. She stepped out of the car carrying a small folder. "You forgot this," she said with a gentle smile, handing him the unopened school transfer papers she had quietly collected from the principal before they could be processed. Malik looked at the envelope, then slowly tore it in half. Nia clapped happily without fully understanding why, only knowing that both adults were smiling again. 1 year later, the annual school fundraiser filled the same gymnasium with laughter, colorful decorations, and proud families. The same teacher welcomed everyone with a bright smile before waving toward the entrance. "Mom and Dad, over here. We are ready for the family picture." This time no one laughed. No one looked confused. Charlotte reached for Malik's hand naturally, and he held it with quiet confidence while Nia stood between them, beaming brighter than the afternoon sun. Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the branches of the old oak tree beside the playground as children laughed in the distance. The cameras flashed once more, but the most important moment was not captured inside the photograph. It lived in the peaceful silence afterward, where two different lives had finally become one family without anyone needing to explain a single thing.